Okay, I think we're back to Patty.
So it's in your binders under section 2, and you'll see the slide printout and the material. So this section will cover a time activity study as well as an environmental phase study of organic synthetic turf chemicals. Presenters me and also Dr. Dimitri Panagopoulos from the lab, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. It's partial slide. I don't know what happened to it, but I can walk through it. This is a diagram showing an overview of the exposure route set for chemical release from synthetic turf or playground surface in our study. So ingestion of crumb rubber can be exposure pathway, turf particles, also inhalation of airborne particles from the turf material, skin contact to surface during playground or turf, playing on the turf field. These can lead to transfer of chemical into eventually absorption into our body.
But just to be clear for the audience, there were some arrows missing there, but I think it was relatively self-explanatory.
It was there last night. It's a different computer. Here is a diagram showing the example of exposure parameter that potentially important for our study, including first the location of the field and the playground. Being indoor, outdoor can cause a different class of a different category of chemical emission and also different activity pattern of the player. So it causes different exposure. And the exposure route, like I said before, the ingestion, thermal contact, inhalation are the interests of the study. And the exposure duration and the frequency, these are very sport activity related and specialized. So it depends on the sports type and the playground. We will see different exposure frequency, how often, how often, how long they play, the kids play, different age of the people that play on the ground. So whether it's a competitive versus a recreational player, they will have a very different exposure frequency and duration. So in consider of that, OEHHA is planning a time activity behavior study for this particular synthetic turf study. And like I mentioned earlier, OEHHA has commissioned Dr. Diana Cassady from University of California, Davis, to conduct a pilot study. And in her report submitted in May 2016, she provided, based on the limited pool of players she surveyed on football and soccer, she has also combined online schedule from high school on how long, what time the player play on the ground and practice. So her report provides estimate of high and low estimate on exposure scenario. She also provides a recommendation on how to conduct a full study on the behavior pattern. And based on this report, OEHHA is developing a time activity behavioral study. And this slide, this diagram outlines the step of the study we are in planning. First, we will do a survey to estimate the population of participants, sport participants using fields in California. And then we will design the study. Since it involves human subject, it will go through the institution review board review and approval. And then we'll go out to the field and conduct survey and collect data, more detail in the next slide. And then by the end, we'll summarize estimation on the exposure parameter to fit into our full study. So the study itself, we are hoping is to survey player, parents, as well as non-player adults, including coach and referee, because usually they do go through their age of practice on the field, as well as their coaching on the kids now. They can provide valuable information. We plan to do in-person interview as well as online survey to increase the coverage throughout the California. And the information we collect will be including demographics, the culture, some culture are more tuned to certain behavior, certain sports, the sports history, and sports-related activity, as well as non-sport-related activity. And following, we also will do field survey and include two parts. Go out and survey and observe player on the field doing game, doing practice, and also observe the bystander, the parents, the kid, the sibling that are on the field, their behavior. Mainly to capture the sport-related activity, non-sport-related activity, hot dog being served during break, water drink, that kind of activity. And also we will do a video, we plan to do a video tape of player, and the footage of these video tape will be translated into micro-level time activity in terms of frequency, duration, analysis. At this point, we are planning to videotape 4 positions per event. Taking soccer example here, our goal is to videotape different position in a game or a practice, because different position player do have different activity, different practice. For example, a goalkeeper will have different set of practice, very different from the forward or the defender, and they will have very different interaction with the field and potential different exposure. Okay, this diagram come back to the example. So at the end, we're hoping to, this is just a serious example that we're trying to collect the data, where's the field, the exposure route, the frequency, the duration of the player for the sports. So these data will be summarized in the report, and this diagram shows the timeline of the study. So you can see that very aggressively, soon after this meeting, we'll start our plan, we'll start our process of the study. We are planning with university experts trying to conduct this study, population estimation followed by strategy on survey, sampling plan, interview plan, ILB review of the document, recruit a participant, going out to the field to administer the survey, doing online survey, observation, videotape of the survey. Eventually next year, we will start the exposure parameter estimation and a report by 2018.
Thank you, Patty. But I would just start off by saying, does the panel have any general comments on the time activity behavior study plan? Dr. Bennett and then Mr. Avol.
Again, I just wanted to say that a lot of work's been done, and I forgot when I spoke before to compliment Dr. Madalena on how much he had done. So I want to compliment everybody this time. The other thing I wanted to say that was, because I read the whole report, or read some more about it, and you didn't really mention it this time, but in the report, and I think in your plan, you definitely had the emphasis and the realization that the activity patterns of sort of the more competitive players were going to be different than the recreational, and I think that you were planning on focusing some of this on the more competitive leagues, and I think that would be important to the people, to the public, because I think there's a lot of realization that those competitive players might have a lot more contact with the field. And then the other thing, it just occurred to me, I know that the public does have some concern about the skin abrasions, particles in the eye, and things like that. And I know that we're focusing on the activity pattern, but I didn't know if these sort of mild, abrasions and things that the players might occur, if it might be interesting to get some frequency information, even though it would be recall of the parents on how often their kids get those. It might be one way to get some frequency information on this, and I didn't know if that had been considered at all.
Go ahead, Penny.
the study is being developed. So yes, abrasion has been a lot of discussion going on, and we're hoping to capture, that's why we interviewed the coach and the parents to capture any abrasion injury that they can recall. On field observation, we will have a snapshot of it, but that's why survey will have a bigger and better coverage. Yes, we do anticipate.
Ed?
So at least three important considerations are sex, age, and seasonality. I don't know if there's more to be said or if you're still planning about it, but I certainly would be interested in hearing more about sex being considered here, boys and girls across the age spectrum. And then in terms of your planning for your survey, the seasonality issue, nowadays kids play year-round in a number of different leagues. I'm not going to argue that they play differently at different times of the year, but I am going to suggest that at different times of the year there may be different frequency patterns of players on the field, repeated abrasions, et cetera. And also because of seasonality issues, exposure.
Anybody want to answer Mr. Avol's question?
Yeah, that's why it's important to start by having estimation and look at the population. In the population estimation, we are going to look at the sex issue, the age, the male, female, how many female we find in California, how many male we find, the distribution, the age, certain age, play certain level of competitiveness. That's the information we would like to collect and we're hoping to collect. Yes. And again, seasonal, different sport and different season, they do have different activity. We're hoping the survey can cover that kind of information. Yes.
Yeah, I saw in the plan that you were trying to get, sampling at high ozone areas and different seasons within the different areas. So, it looked like you were taking these things into consideration, but.
Exactly.
Dr. Sheldon?
So my question is that sort of has to do with goal study and how you go forward. Again, I think you're trying to answer the question of, first of all, is there a risk for people playing on, synthetic turf? And so the question is are you planning on oversampling for those situations that you think are the highest risk and then going other places? Right now it doesn't look like you are, but again, I feel as though to sort of make the public feel that you've made your best effort to answer that first question may be valuable. And so my question is that how are you planning on treating that?
I think that's very important, yes. Our goal is we do want to capture the high end of the exposure, the more risk population, or you can call. They play more longer and they play longer in the lifespan as well. They can be a little bit more active, potential more injury. So we're hoping to capture a high end estimate in the study design. Again, we're hoping that by collaborating with expertise in the exposure field, they can give us insight on how to develop this study. And at the same time, we also want to have, not to look just focus only on the high exposure, but also look at the general population. But definitely the high exposure, we need to make sure we get it well covered.
And I want to add that in addition to that, the concentration of a chemical in the media, and as well as the intake rates or contact rates, intake rates like inhalation rate, oral injection rate, all those things would contribute to that as well. Average versus high-end estimates.
Dr. Kyle?
One of the studies that has been done, and I forget which one, I'm sorry, but identified kids with pica as a possibly high impacted group that might have a significant risk. You probably remember which study that was. And I'm wondering if some discussion of that should go here too, because there's always kids running around, sitting around on soccer fields who aren't playing, littler kids. And if they're eating this stuff, then, I mean, a lot of kids eat whatever's on the ground. And, we say with pica, but it's a lot of kids who do that sometimes. So I'm wondering if that might be a scenario also to consider it's not the players or the bystanding adults, it's the little brothers and sisters of the players oftentimes. So that's one comment. And my second comment is with regard to how to capture the kinds of activities that people are doing. For practices, I wonder if it might be worthwhile looking at the types of drills that are done. It's not so much by position, but practices have a fairly standard format. You spend this much time on dribbling, passing, et cetera, et cetera. And you might be able to figure out which of those have different exposure scenarios, and then you could model that in different ways. Suppose you have 3 practices a week that follow these patterns and not have to do as much taping. The idea of taping to figure that out versus talking to 3 coaches, it seems like it could be something that might save you some time. I don't know. Maybe you've already thought of that.
Well, before anybody answers, staff wanted to know about what we thought about bystander exposure, and I think particularly child bystanders. So that was very well done, Dr. Kyle. Any comments from staff?
Especially certain position or certain player, the drill is going to be very repetitive and longer than normal game because the game is like 45 minutes to an hour, but they will be repeating the same drill over hours and hours, especially some of the higher competitive player. That's why our observation is not going to just go out to the game. We want to see the practice, and that's why we also start by interviewing the coach to get the idea how we can best capture this kind of activity, what kind of script activity, what kind of drill they usually do. It's important for us to have some idea before we go out and make sure we capture the important activity. Yes, very good idea.
But child bystander exposures, what have you thought about so far?
Part of the observation will include the bystander, but also we are going to collaborate, working with a university expert on try to tease out young kid activity in playground, in turf situation, what kind of hand-to-mouth activity kind of can cause exposure. We're going to work with them closely to design and extract data that's available. So it's still in a very planning stage. We don't have detail, but we do try to capture we are planning to.
I just want to add that certain activity or behavior are more amenable to be captured by videotaping, and others are better captured through surveys and interviews.
So does the panel feel like the study design, will it provide the data necessary to characterize player and perhaps child bystander exposures? That's the bottom line. Dr. McCone?
I think there's going to be sufficient information collected. There may be some work ahead to try and figure out how to aggregate, disaggregate, lump. I mean, it might be more information than you need, which is probably not a bad thing. It's like what Dr. Madalena was saying earlier. If you got a spectrum with all the peaks, even if you don't know what they all are now, you can save it. Well, here you're going to get a lot of activity data, and at first it may be hard to sort it out, and it'll be nice to have it in case you find a pattern or a way to condense it or reinterpret it, but I think it should be sufficient. Again, just to repeat, the challenge will be how to use it without being overwhelmed by it.
Dr. Sheldon, then Dr. Kyle.
Yeah, these are really getting to the weeds. So everybody talks about, how tire crumb adheres to everything that every part of kids' bodies when they play. I think it would be important to sort of take pictures afterwards to see how much is actually adhering to children. The other thing is that I haven't seen mentioned any place is, and maybe now everybody wears sunscreen, but what is the impact of sunscreen that people are applying, and how it makes things more bioavailable and how it makes particles adhere. And then the last thing, this is probably really off the wall, is that I was reading this morning about, in one of the EPA reviews, about how the NFL requires the NFL to measure compression on the fields before each game because it's certain positions kick up the turf a whole lot more, and they have to put more turf down in these places. I don't know what this protocol is, but if it's something simple, it might be useful to do this on some of the fields to see what the actual differences are in the amount of tire crumb that's on the field. However, it may be very complicated, but it was just a thought that struck me because we all are trying to figure out, where is the wear and tear, and if it's something easy, it might help you.
Those of you that follow football know that they measure compression or pressure in footballs as well. Dr. Kyle.
Really, Deflategate? We're into Deflategate. I guess I have two comments. One is specifically in response to your question. It seems like maybe this is just terminology, but I don't know that you want to take on the task to try to characterize everyone's time activity patterns. It seems like it might be, you might want to characterize what are examples of time activity patterns that can be sort of put into scenarios that might include sort of the worst case and a more average case, et cetera, so you figure out, the different drills have certain kinds of exposures and games have certain kind of exposures, and running around the field or whatever, that you can assemble and disassemble in different ways. And then that would it seems like it would reduce the amount of data in some pattern that anybody could recognize. And then somebody comes in and says, yeah, but my kid has 4 practices a week instead of 3, you could remodel that too. So that's one thing. The other thing is, again, about the stickiness. What about a shakeout, of kids, not just photographs, but what if you actually got some volunteers to actually see how much stuff people are really taking home? Because anecdotally, people say it just gets all over everything and in their car, in their house. And I
Closets,
myself
yeah.
have had that experience, and so I agree with that. So it seems like that might be something you could actually measure beyond with photos. And then my third thing, I guess I have 3 things, not 2, is, well, what about the take-home pathway? We know that's important for a lot of chemicals and dust and pesticides and stuff like that. Is there any possibility that there's a take-home pathway for this stuff that gets into your car and your clothes and your kid's bed and the washer and then further degrades, et cetera? Or is that, because people are worried about that. I don't know if it's a real thing or not, but it might be worth finding out.
So any other factors that the panel feels should be considered in terms of the time activity behavior study? Ed had mentioned age, gender, and seasonality. Any other factors aside from the ones we've already? If not, that's good. We're actually incredibly on time. Ed.
Just one other consideration. I'm not sure exactly when your selection. Obviously, there's a wide range of racial components of the population, and I don't know how that's going to be factored into which fields and which populations, which groups, et cetera. But it may be something we're thinking about in terms of bio uptake and characteristic behaviors, both in terms of actual on-field exposure and then take-home, et cetera, cleanliness exposures.
I think he probably meant race and ethnicity. Yeah. Dr. Bennett?
I do worry about it all getting too complicated, but I think an easy way to really focus on the high-end exposure is to really focus on the more competitive players, because they're the ones that are doing it all the time for a longer period of time, that are going to have more contact. And if you just focus on kids that have gone through the competitive side rather than the rec side, I think you'll have it covered pretty well.
Dr. Kyle?
And but maybe in addition to that, also the little kids that fall down all the time, and are rolling around more. I mean, I think you're right. The competitive, amongst the more skilled players, the more competitive players will have more exposure. But some of these kids' soccer games, you just see this stuff kicked up all around. So maybe there's two extremes to that. I don't.
Any last comments? If not, I think we're ready for our lunch break, and we would reconvene at 1. Thank you, everyone. We'll be back.